I just feel a heaviness over just the weight of evil in our world. I guess in one sense, it just encourages me all the more of how the gospel needs to go forward and people need Jesus. They're wanting more out of life. They're wanting meaning. They're wanting purpose. They're wanting value. They want to be able to say on a day like today that
Right.
evil does exist, that, that the world ought not to be that way.
This is the Made to Advance podcast. I'm your host, Brian Aulick. We're here to inspire and equip you for your best future. Well, hey, welcome everybody. It is so good to be with you today on Made to Advance. And before we get started, I want to ask you to do me a favor, and that is rate and review our podcast. Man, that helps us so much. It's an encouragement. It helps us get the word out to more people. And as I've said many times, it helps us bring on more incredible guests like the one we have today. Today I have with me Engedi Steiger. He is the founder and president of Apologetics Canada Ministries. Engedi loves pressing into issues confronting our culture from a Christian perspective. He has been published widely in both books and articles and has created some amazing video projects that I would encourage you to check out. Maybe those will come up as we talk. I was able to bring Engedi in to talk with some of our church staff a few months back. And after that conversation, I'm like, I want to have Engedi back on Made to Advance. And so, Engedi, it's great to have you with us today.
Yeah, Brian, it is great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was doing like kind of the look back, thinking about you being on today. And I realized when you came on, when you joined my kind of department heads and me for a little bit of a conversation, that was not long after everything with Wes was just, that was blowing up. I think he'd just been on Rogan, not much earlier than that. Mm-hmm. And as I recall it, at least, you're like, oh yeah, our lives are crazy here at Apologetics Canada right now. Has it slowed down at all, or is it still like just going with your hair on fire mode? Well, that's a funny joke talking to a
yeah. If you're watching this, there's no hair to be on fire. Maybe my eyebrows are on fire.
There we go.
But what's funny? That's a great question. So I would say that before the whole Wes Huff thing blew up, we were already going at 100 miles an hour. Like the Lord was already blessing the ministry, and we had just had our most incredible year of ministry to date. And I remember Wes and the team and I were all thinking, how could we do any more ministry than this? I mean, how could it get any better than this? And then
that's great.
Yeah, and then the Joe Rogan, the Billy Carson Joe Rogan thing exploded. Yeah. And then our lives went into warp drive, and we realized there's a whole another level of busyness that we didn't even know existed. And yeah, we've been living in that ever since.
Have you been able to? It's a good kind of organizational lesson for anybody who's listening, and we have a number of entrepreneurs and different kinds of leaders who are listening right now. But it's a really interesting leadership lesson to think, okay, you were functioning already at a high level, and you sort of, without even intending it, just kind of had to go to the next level. Have you since adjusted systems, structures, processes to accommodate for that? And what's that adjustment look like?
That is a really great question. And those that are listening that perhaps are in business or ministry, entrepreneurs, or those that are experiencing rapid growth, it's an interesting thing to experience where you need to put processes in place that you can manage your life and to be totally transparent. I'm working that out, but we had to make a number of hires. One thing that I've learned is it is absolutely crucial to have some key hires in your organization or company that are very organized and that can help put structure in place. And one of the bigger challenges that I've faced, and Brian, I don't know if you've dealt with this, where I get more emails that come in than I can respond to. It's like we actually just celebrated as a staff. I kid you not, this week that I had only 6 emails in my inbox, like that we'd finally gotten it down to this manageable level. I mean, before then, our emails were we had some email, not mine personally, but we had others that were in the 500s. Mine was just consistently in the 70 to 100 department. And it just didn't matter how fast you sent an email out, they would come back in, quicker than you could respond to them. And so learning how to put processes into place to deal with that has been a real learning curve.
Man, I cannot imagine that. The OCD part of me would go absolutely bananas if I had to just. I mean, it's like anything in life. I suppose you just adjust. But it makes me all the more grateful that you would join me for this conversation today, because you could be. I guess that's when you say yes, is when you get down to 6 emails. You're like, okay, I guess I can do something like this.
I can do a podcast with Brian now. It's
fun. I appreciate you fitting me in. Well, we're coming off a really, really sad and significant day. We're recording the day after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And even though this episode won't be broadcasting for a few weeks from that point, I just thought I would ask you what, how is this affecting you, the organization? Is this something that's being talked about much in Canada, or is it kind of like, no, that's just happening, down in the States, and it's not our thing? How do you see its broader statement in terms of where we're at as a culture?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. As I reflect on that, first of all, I think about the fact that, on September 10th, you had Charlie Kirk assassinated publicly, just a terrible tragedy. And then on top of that, you had a school shooting that happened on the same day. And then today, you and I are recording this on 9/11. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty heavy. I don't know. I don't know if you feel just kind of the weight of our culture. We live in a very divided culture. I try not to spend too much time on social media, but man, the amount of division and hatred on social media is just really quite shocking. And so there's a part of me, we were in the middle of a staff meeting when the Charlie Kirk news kind of broke, and as a staff, we just stopped and just took a moment to pray over, what's going on in culture, what's going on in the United States. And so for me, Brian, I just feel a heaviness over just the weight of evil in our world. I guess in one sense, it just encourages me all the more of how the gospel needs to go forward and people need Jesus. But it's just one of those shocking moments where you're like, wow, there's a whole lot more evil in our world than I realize. We obviously don't want to just dwell in the evil. But here's something else, though, that I want to bring up, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Mm-hmm. Because you're a pastor, Brian, and I pastored for 20 years. And I've had a number of pastor friends of mine, and myself included, as a pastor, when you put yourself up on a stage, or as a public speaker, when you put yourself up on a stage, there is this vulnerability going, hey, I'm putting myself up here, and today I might get shot. And I've had pastor friends of mine that, were concerned about that, going, is today the day that I'm going to be preaching a sermon and I'm going to, have something crazy happen in my church. And that's one of those things that I struggle with. I'm curious whether or not that's a thought you've had and something you've struggled with.
Yeah, I think that most of me doesn't struggle with it because I tend to think in terms of probabilities. And so I tend to think it is so incredibly unlikely that would be something that I would face. And so even, that part of me can kick into a very rational gear. Once in a while, I think, but it can happen anywhere and there are never any guarantees. I am glad we've got a very skilled, trained security team at every one of our campuses as a church. And so they drill and train for things all the time. We have a really good sort of security approach and set of protocols. So I think that's helpful to me. But I would say mostly it doesn't serve as an ongoing concern. Once in a while, it does, and you just know. I mean, you can tell myself, our area is so safe and all this, but evil is irrational. So one of the great apologetic points, I think, that when sometimes people use that question, how do I make sense of evil? And I always like to say, and this is really right up your wheelhouse with apologetics, but I always like to say, I think I got this from Christopher Wright, that evil is fundamentally irrational. It's fundamentally doesn't make sense because when God created the world with order, with rationality, etc., evil was not part of it. So by definition, when evil enters the world, it doesn't make sense. And that part of me that goes, hey, The logic doesn't matter. The locale doesn't matter. Evil is irrational. It's crazy. It doesn't, follow a sense of common sense rules or a set of common sense rules or whatever. That part of me goes, man, there's just never any guarantees. But being said, do you find yourself thinking about that a lot when you're speaking publicly?
I have over the years, especially as things get, because I'm constantly in front of crowds in various places and new places. Because in one sense, you're kind of in your own community. You're like, oh, my community's safe. But when you're constantly being parachuted into various communities and you're giving these talks, you're like, I have no idea what I'm stepping into,
right?
Today. But it speaks to me. It just speaks volumes. Even though, Brian, that you have to have a security team, at your church. That's the kind of culture that you and I find ourselves in these days. That this sort of evil has become more and more common. Of course, it's not just a pastor taking to a stage, but as a parent sending your kid off to school, where you're like, man, I hope my son or daughter is safe as they go off to school. Again, I one question that I can't help but think is that historically we're in the safest time the world's ever known. Just kind of interesting if you think about it. And yet at the same time, it sure doesn't feel very safe,
right.
Especially when we think about what's going on in the news today. And I can't help but wonder if sometimes we just need to be reminded that the world is a broken place, and it is desperately in need of redemption, of restoration. And it's like one of those reminders, do I believe that? Am I committed to that?
Right. Well, I'm going to make a comment at the beginning of a teaching. I'll do this Sunday at the beginning of my sermon. I'll make a comment about, in particular, the loss of Charlie. And I just think that Charlie, more than probably any of us right now, would, I was thinking about going into the message, and you almost want to offer an extended lament. But I thought, you know what? I think Charlie, from his vantage point right now, would be saying, preach the gospel louder and more courageously than ever before, because to your point, when we see the wickedness in the world, and even this dramatic of wickedness, you're not even tempted to think if we just get the right policy, that's going to fix it. This is so much deeper than that, and I think it really just freshly emboldens me to say, we need the love of Christ. We need freedom in Christ. We need the power of the gospel and of the Holy Spirit, and that's why we got to keep standing up and preaching. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you guys' ministry, about Apologetics Canada, is because that is something you're so committed to doing, is entering into the cultural fray and saying we want to engage the issues of the day. I'd love for our listeners just to hear a little bit of your background. I always think it's fun just to hear some of our guests' background and then how they came to know Jesus. So maybe you could just take a couple minutes and let us know you're not actually a Canadian, so which is so funny to me to lead Apologetics Canada, but you're a covert kind of import.
You've already let my secret out, man. Yeah, my origin story, if you will, begins in Portland, Oregon. So I'm originally from the United States. I'm from Portland. I heard about this place called Canada, and then I was one of those Americans that didn't have very good, and my geography wasn't as it should be. And I found out that there's this place called Canada up north, and not only was it its own country, but it had its own currency. And I found out that currency wasn't worth as much as the U.S. currency. And I thought, well, this place is sounding pretty awesome. So I actually went to school in Canada because I could go there for less money. And I met my wife, fell in love with her, fell in love with Canada, got married, and have been here ever since. We have two boys. One of my, they're 16 and 18. So I'm in that stage of life right now where I just took my son last week off to university and kind of grappling with that. And just a little bit more of my background story would be that I didn't grow up in necessarily a Christian family. I grew up in a very broken, dysfunctional family. My dad left my mom when I was 4. But I witnessed a miracle. I witnessed my mom go from a shell of a human being after the divorce to encountering Jesus and seeing how God transformed her life from the inside out. And that actually had a huge impact on me as a young man, because I'd always believed that God existed. I just didn't believe that God cared that I existed. That was the real question that I was wrestling with. I'd say I was wrestling with more questions like the meaning of life, but watching what Jesus was able to do in my mom's life got me thinking, man, he could do the same in mine. And that started my Christian journey when I was about 17.
Wow, that's really cool. And did you feel, Portland is less so than it used to be, but notoriously secularized. Did you feel any kind of hostility for taking steps towards Christ, or was that not a factor for you?
No, not at all. One thing to appreciate about Portland is the way that I would describe Portland growing up there is that Portland was weird, but Portland wasn't hostile.
Okay.
It was just kooky, I think was the best way to put it. Like, for example, I remember seeing a guy in a Darth Vader suit riding a unicycle down the street, and you just kind of got used to that sort of thing, like, right? It's just like, oh, okay, that's Portland. But I'd say in the last number of years, Portland's just really taken a dark turn. That really breaks my heart, and I pray for Portland that things will begin to turn around in that state.
Tell us a little bit about what Apologetics Canada is and what led you to start it.
Yeah, so I was doing as I mentioned, I pastored for a number of years, but I was doing a master's degree down in Los Angeles at Biola University. My wife and I had every intention to head off into the mission field, and I was knocking on those doors, of which none of them were opening. And I remember thinking, Lord, this is so weird. It should be easy to become a missionary. I'm going to raise my own support, And that got me really thinking about, well, what's the Lord doing? How's the Lord leading in my life? And at that time, I began to see, that was at the height of the new atheist movement back in 2010, when I was at Biola looking at what the next move of my life would be. And I began to see the statistics of the number of young people that were leaving the faith. And in particular, I was hearing a talk by Lee Strobel in which he was giving some of these statistics. And I thought, my Lord, if these are even remotely accurate, we've got to do something about this. It was like 60 to 90% of our young people leaving the faith. Mm-hmm. And the statistics in Canada, they actually did a study here in Canada, and it demonstrated that the stats were pretty identical. So that was the impetus for me to start Apologetics Canada. I saw great work happening in the United States, and I thought, man, Canada desperately needs this. So there was an organization at the time called Apologetics.com that I saw in LA doing great work. We kind of saw ourselves as Apologetics.com Canada. We ended up dropping the .com and just became Apologetics Canada.
Gotcha. Okay. And it might seem like a silly question, but what does an apologetics organization do? We've kind of hinted at it a little bit with regard to you going out and engaging in, say, public spaces where you can have conversations with people about issues of the day. But in general, what's Apologetics Canada do? You produce resources. Maybe take us through just a little bit of what people can expect if say, they jump on your website and look for more.
Yeah, well, first, the word apologetics, and I actually use that word. A lot of people don't like that we use that word as our title, but I felt like Christians just needed to understand our history better, that apologetics has been a part of the history, the Christian tradition, that we have this robust intellectual tradition of being, deep thinkers, both theologically, philosophically, and scientifically. And so apologetics just comes from the Greek word apologia. It means to give an answer or a reason, specifically as it's used in the Bible by Peter and Paul, to give a reason for the hope that we have in Jesus. And as Peter tells us, to do so with gentleness and respect. So for us as an organization, our motto we take from Jesus, found in different places like Mark chapter 12. Our tagline is love God, love people. It's basically paraphrasing Jesus giving the greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And what we do is we create resources. We create resources that the church can use, and we engage in the area of evangelism. So I would say, by and large, we are an evangelistic organization that is equipping and coming alongside as a resource to the church. Maybe one way to put this that I think you would appreciate is I believe that the church is God's plan A, and I don't think there's a plan B. Yeah. And so as an organization, we exist to help the church and not to be separate. I don't like that idea of parachurch kind of idea. I kind of think of us as, we are a resource to the church.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, one of the things I send out thank you cards to every person who gives to Engedi, and I put that very phrase on every single one of the thank you cards. I write, hey, the church is God's plan A and there is no plan B, just to encourage them when they're supporting the work of the church. It's a big deal. And I love that you guys have that focus. And yet, if somebody as just an individual wants to bounce onto your website and look for resources, they can definitely find things as just an individual as well. It's not like you've got to be a church to benefit from Apologetics Canada, correct?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So we engage with individuals, but we're wanting to connect them and work with the local church.
Yeah, that's so good. I mentioned this in some questions I sent to you ahead of time. It seems like right now Christianity is kind of having a cultural moment of sorts. You just, whether it be music that is, I think of Forrest Frank, just sort of everybody going bananas around Forrest and his sales or plays or whatever streams, and Brandon Lake and some of these guys. And even speaking earlier of Charlie Kirk, just his place in the public sphere as a believer. What's your take right now relative to where Christian faith is at in the culture? I mean, do you feel like, wow, we're really seeing a shift or a tide change? Or do you go, well, it might be a little soon to start drawing those kinds of conclusions?
I would say 100% we're seeing a change in cultural tide. Yeah, there's no question about it. And I've talked quite a bit about this with a lot of my friends and various people, where I'll be, even texted a pastor recently or said, hey, I think that we're on potentially even the verge of a revival. So I think that there's multiple things at play here, especially for somebody who's done ministry as long as I have. I've seen a lot of cultural change over the years. And to give you an idea of this is what I think is happening, is that since 2001, and it's interesting that we're talking about this on 9/11, because I think it actually has everything to do with this cultural moment. Back when 9/11 happened, this became a lightning rod moment for a vigorous hatred towards religion. Mm-hmm. And for the new atheists, it was the rallying call, not against Islam, but against religion, in general, and Christianity specifically. And you have, four individuals in particular. You had Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, and of course Dawkins. Richard Dawkins.
I almost said Robert, and I was like, "That's not right." Yeah, yeah.
So you have these four horsemen of the apologetics. Of the new atheists, as they are often referred to. But now we're in a new era. Now I would say they're not the new atheists anymore; they're the old atheists, and that there has been this cultural shift that has happened. And I would say that this is a part of a much larger shift that has been taking place since the Enlightenment, where you've had this rise in atheism that's been going on for centuries, and it kind of crescendoed in the new atheist movement. And now we're seeing a pendulum swing, and it's happening quite quickly. And I would make the argument that it's been taking place since World War II. But we're seeing this very rapid after the new atheist movement, where there's this movement away from atheism. So when I'm out doing speaking engagements, when I first started, I met atheists all the time. I literally, Brian, can't tell you the last time I met an atheist.
Wow.
They're out there, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, sure.
But are they as outspoken as they used to be? Not a chance. And are they as prolific? Not a chance. Even when you look at, various online atheist personas, first of all, there's not as many. And secondly, they've really, their timbre has changed quite considerably from the vitriol that we used to get to what we have today. And so basically what I'm trying to say is that there is this pendulum swing that's been moving away from the new atheists. And you have to remember that the new atheists were promoting this worldview in which there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no value, that there's just blind, pitiless indifference, as Dawkins said, and people are moving away from that. That's a very bleak view of the world. It's not tenable. You can't really live out a meaningless existence. And I think where we're seeing then is people are wanting more out of life. They're wanting meaning. They're wanting purpose. They're wanting value. They want to be able to say on a day like today that 9/11 was wrong, that evil does exist. and that this should be condemned, and that the death of somebody, the assassination of somebody like Charlie Kirk was evil, that the world ought not to be that way. But if you're going to hold that kind of a worldview, well, it's going to require things that atheism can't provide, and that religion, Christianity, and specifically can. And so what I'm seeing, to kind of finish this thought then, is a movement from a closed view of the world where God can't be a part of it, to an open world, an open view of the world in which God can be a part of it, but so can a whole lot of other things.
Mm-hmm.
So when I go do speaking engagements, I find people that are open to God existing, but they're also open to aliens existing. They're open to New Age spirituality. They're open to Bigfoot. They're open to everything. But
how does that? Totally. Yeah. I mean, just being open in general is a great step in the right direction, because it's a conversation. And at least it's that Christianity is no longer just straight away viewed as like implausible. How has that changed then? And I'm just thinking right now for folks who are in conversations who are very open and, very spiritual even perhaps, how has that changed the nature of our role as apologists, those who are arguing for Christian faith, when it's no longer I'm trying to give you evidence that God exists, but I'm trying to really persuade you of the merit of one worldview over and above others?
One area that I think is important in this current moment is, and this shouldn't surprise you, of course, is that to make sure that you understand what you believe and that you're well versed in the Bible. Mm-hmm. That you've spent time in God's Word, and that you can actually, provide people with answers and truth and point them to the gospel. So the other thing too, though, that I think that you've got to have, and that is that you've got to have confidence, that you know what you believe and that you're confident in what you believe. And in that confidence, you are willing to hear from people who have different opinions than you and even kooky and odd beliefs, and be willing to be able to listen to them and be able to care for them. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm saying that is because some of the people that I've encountered that, or Christians that don't do this well, are the ones that don't have a solid foundation. Mm. And I think that they become very insecure. If you don't know, if you're not convinced of what you believe, you can become very defensive, insecure, and you actually don't want to engage with people in conversation and be willing to listen. And by the way, just on that note, I do a lot of speaking engagements with non-Christians, a lot. And one of the things that I find, by and large, with non-Christians is that they want to be heard. They want to be able to have a conversation. And it's interesting. It seems as though they want to be heard more than they want answers. But of course, they want answers as well. But that's part of being heard.
Oh, that's so interesting, because I think when we as Christians think, what does it look like to come alongside somebody who's asking questions, spiritually exploring, open, we think of, what do I need to say? What argument do I need to give? What kind of proof can I have? And I think it's a great point, and it's just starting in the place of listening well and listening deeply. And I think you've probably found this to be the case too. Sometimes you ask one question and they answer, but actually, the real question is the issue underneath the issue underneath the issue. And so you really have to keep digging sometimes to really understand what's going on inside a person. This may be, I'm thinking of now one person I know of who is not a believer, and that person would give you intellectual reasons why they are at this point not willing to trust Jesus, but deep down, I've since found that they have some pretty significant issues with their dad, who was very, very hostile to faith. Well, that's in some ways a different conversation. And of course, with the work of Paul Vitz, and I'm sure others, that there's this, there's actually quite a trend of people having difficult relationships with their dad and then being less receptive to the gospel. But all of a sudden, it just changes the conversation a little bit. Now, do you find there's a lot of conversation about how Gen Z in particular is really been receptive to Jesus? And I just yesterday was reading information that came out from, I think it was put together by Barna. I'm not sure if Barna did the research or not, but showing even church attendance patterns based on each generation. And it's a clear uphill, like people are attending church more as we get into the younger generations. What do you make of that? I mean, do you see that kind of a trend yourself with Gen Z in particular, or not so much?
No, I do. I absolutely do. I also see other things that are happening though in the mix. If we were to be honest, I also see that young people are also becoming much more political and much more entrenched in different camps. That's also taking place like simultaneously. So there's some interesting things that are kind of taking place along with this. But yes, on a positive note, there is this movement and interest in the gospel. And again, I think it's because that you've got a generation that is longing for something more to life. They're longing for meaning and purpose and value. So I mean, even if you think about it from this perspective, I know like in our culture today we talk about the social justice warrior as an example. But how do you be an atheist social justice warrior? How do you believe that there is no right and wrong, and then try to advocate for right and wrong? Like it just doesn't work. And so there tends to be this openness then to faith. I think the big issue though that I see with young people that are coming to faith is and as they're exploring Christianity in general, is they're asking two questions that I'm seeing over and over again. I'm curious, Brian, if you're seeing this as well. On the one hand, they're asking, is it true? Yes, I'm seeing that. But a bigger question, it's kind of like this movement away from the new atheist where you're asking, okay, does God exist? And I've seen more and more this question of, is God good? Is the church good? Will Christianity actually lead to a flourishing life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that comes up. I mean, I think that the church issue has still not, gone away with people wrestling with, okay, even if I'm a fan of Jesus, I still get a lot of, but I don't know about the church. I'm not sure about organized religion of any sort. Those kinds of things still come up a lot. And I hear practical questions all the time, still coming out of pain. I mean, the question of evil and the question, it just never goes away. If God is good, how could He allow this? Why am I going through that? Why, if I've prayed so many times, is He not doing anything about it? So I come up with those. I come across those questions an awful lot. But I would agree. I mean, I saw this book title. I think it's a Gospel Coalition title that the author was basically saying in an earlier generation, Reason for God by Tim Keller, which I'm sure you're familiar with, was just the book on wrestling with people's questions. And Tim, of course, wrote that book in response to what he was getting asked in New York City at that time. And this author was saying he really doesn't get the questions surrounding the stuff Tim was wrestling with in Reason for God anymore. It's all questions surrounding really just church-related things. Why is the church messed up? Why should I be part of a church? Why is these kinds of things? So are you saying you see similar trends in the conversations you're having?
Yeah, I do. It's very interesting because on the one hand, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of the questions that were in that book, I don't necessarily see people asking, like, did Jesus rise, from the dead, sort of idea, questions about the resurrection. Now, of course, they'll ask questions about, is there life after death? But again, a lot of these questions tend to be couched in moral categories. Like, well, would I even want to go to heaven? Like, and why would I go to church? Because there's so many, there's broken people or there's corrupt pastors, right? Mm-hmm. So those tend to be kind of the waters that they're wading through, and that we need to be able to help engage them with. I also think that this is a question that they're really wrestling with because young people in general, and I think this is just true though across the board when you look at this statistically, we are in and have been for a while now in an epidemic of loneliness. And just what we would just generally refer to as just fractured relationships and brokenness. I mean, listen, my sister is a counselor, And her and I have discussed on a number of occasions how she's like, man, Andy, if people just had better friendships, I would have a lot less clients. So she's not saying that everybody's counseling issues because they don't have a friend. Don't hear me wrong here. But at the same time, she is saying that a lot of people just lack having good relationship. They don't have the kind of connection that church was always meant to be. Church is about community. It's about relationship. It's about actually living out loving God and loving people. And realizing that you and I were created for community, and we weren't created for just any kind of community, but right community, loving community. The kind of community the church was always meant to be, not the kind of community the church has always gotten right. And so...
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
Well, I was just going to say, and I think you would agree with me, that we got to be honest when the church gets it wrong. We got to own that. But that doesn't mean that the church is wrong. You know, that yes, relationship is what we need, but relationship can go off the rails, and we need to reconcile and bring it back into what is right and good and continue on. But that only happens if you're committed to relationship, if you're committed to community.
So if you were talking with someone who is really they were interested and or compelled by Jesus and really open to what the Bible says, but they're like this church thing. You know, maybe they have hurt in their past. Who knows? Maybe they just have skepticism from observations at a distance. Would your first approach to that person be to try to show them how God created the church? Would you kind of do let's put all the hang-ups and issues of the church aside for a second? Would you start with, this is what we're made for by God, this is how we're made, and this is what the church is supposed to do? So you kind of paint a picture of the church, and then I mean, how would you approach that tension if somebody has got that hang up?
It's kind of interesting. I actually would approach it from a little bit different perspective, and I think you were already kind of hinting at this, but I would actually start from the perspective of what it means to be human and what we were created for, and then I would lead towards church. Because one of the things that I talk about is that there's a difference between the parts that a thing is made of and the purposeful whole that a thing is made for. And that when we're talking about what it means to be human, we're talking about what are you made for? What is the purpose of life? And that's when you get into questions about, well, you know, what does the Bible have to say? Well, the Bible, and what do we just see from observation? And that is that, the Bible, I already mentioned this, where Jesus is saying, people were created for the purpose of relationship with God and relationship with people, right? Love God, love people. The greatest commandment, as an example, could give many. And that you see that this is core to who we are as humans. But we also see this just from observation, that loneliness is terrible for you. This is not something that anybody wants nor should desire, and that you and I flourish when we're in community, when we're in relationships. So you can kind of begin to see how when we're talking about what it means to be human, just naturally leads to a conversation about living in community, i.e. church. But one thing, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, where I think the church has gotten it wrong and just needs to adjust its language, is we've kind of added to this problem in the sense that we'll say things like this. We'll give a gospel invitation to people when we will invite people to, or encourage people to invite Jesus into your heart so that you can have a personal relationship with God. And on the one hand, I think we have to be careful sometimes, like, what does that even mean to invite Jesus into my heart? I understand inviting Jesus into my life and surrendering to him, but that's just me just going, okay, let's just make sure we're not using churchy kind of language, communicating to a non-Christian audience that actually makes sense. But then beyond that, do we actually think that that's right, that they've just been invited into a personal relationship with God? Because if that's the case, then naturally they should ask, why go to church? But I would argue that it's two things that, and this is one of the things I talk with people about, is that you've been invited into a personal and communal relationship with God. And that these two things aren't mutually exclusive and they go together. In other words, church is a part of what it means to be a Christian. is living in community with other people, but it's also what it means to be human, is to be in community, not only with people, but with God. And that both of those things taking place together is the ideal community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think and of course, you've been a pastor who's presented the gospel many times too. So I've long wrestled with, and Keller has a great article on different ways of communicating the gospel. And on the one hand, you need to keep it simple and understandable enough that people can respond to what Jesus accomplished on the cross and in the resurrection. And on the other hand, you don't want to invite people into such a truncated gospel that they really don't kind of know what they're signing on for, so to speak. So what I often do, and I don't know what you would think about this, but I would say I like your language. I'd have to think about that as far as when I'm making gospel presentation. But I think what I often do is really, this may sound elementary, but really hitting, of course, Savior of your sins, Lord of your life, and then expanding in that conversation, Lord of your life, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Living on purpose for Christ, living in community, et cetera, so that we understand when we're giving our life to Jesus, we're giving our life to following him in his way, which involves the church. And so that is, for me, how I approach it. What do you think about that? Feel free to criticize.
I agree with it. I would just say it's getting at the same thing from just a different vantage point. And I think sometimes we have to use different vantage points to try to help people to understand what it really means to be a follower of Jesus, right? Like, because if one of the things you often hear people say is, "Oh, it's me and Jesus," and I think what we need to help people to say is, or understand, is that yes, you have this personal relationship with God. But what's God saying? What's God communicating through his word? And what has God created you for? Well, community. So it shouldn't surprise you that as you want to make it just you and Jesus saying, no, it's actually you in the church. It's us in the church, if you will. Yeah. Right? That it's about community. And I just think that as we communicate the gospel going forward in a culture of loneliness that is just rampant, that community just needs to be a part of more and more. We need to lean into that as the ethos of who we are, and it shouldn't surprise us. I like my reason for bringing this up, Brian, is if we have a lot of people that are coming to church and that don't understand what church is about, or if they even need to be a part of church, that you have to ask the question: okay, what has been communicated to lead people to this conclusion? Like how has the gospel been presented that this is what they're kind of taking away? Now, on the flip side, you might find this interesting. I meet people regularly that are coming to church. But what's interesting there is they're not necessarily coming to church sometimes for community, but oftentimes they want to know who God is. And for whatever reason, they culturally that they're thinking, okay, I got to go to church. And so there's this, I can't help but think that there's just this constant education that needs to happen, especially when you're in a culture that is less and less church. Like they don't understand Christianity, and we need to really work at helping to explain to them, what it is and what we believe and stand for.
Yeah, I think that's a good push. That's a good thing for me to be thinking about, because I 100% agree that when you're getting a certain kind of result or outcome over and over again, you need to back up the process and say, okay, why do we keep getting, the recipe is producing a certain kind of cake here. So what's going on, Yeah. And specifically with regard to how we're presenting community. I mean, we know kind of the ingredients going in are it's like we've got rampant isolationism and then also just defining life almost solely by what I feel and kind of an orientation towards
extreme individualism.
Yeah. So individualism. Did I say isolationism? I meant to say individualism. So,
but I would go with both. Man. Yeah. Like I was with you. I was with you.
So that we know at a cultural level is a massive factor and really can't be underestimated. So how do we then bake in the communal side from the front end? That's really good. I'll have to do some more thinking about that, because I think you're right. It's a great question to ask. I'm curious. One of the things that, and this wouldn't be true in all contexts. I know folks who are serving in churches that are in areas, say, such as Portland, that don't have this massive, somewhat Christianized community, but there are still many communities around the country where you do get a pretty decent vestige of people who say, oh, of course I'm a Christian. And they might not be as active anymore because of the cultural pressures to kind of to practice a performative Christianity are no longer there, but they would still at least claim faith at some level. I was just having a conversation with someone this week. That's a very difficult person in some ways to evangelize, seems to me at least. Maybe you disagree. But because they're convinced, of course, I mean, what else would I be in this sort of thing? How would you come alongside that person when, and this gets into tricky territory as a question, as asking the question, because you don't want to be the person saying, oh, I'm judging their salvation. And yet, when we look at the biblical evidences, biblical statements Jesus himself makes in the broader New Testament of what it means to be a follower of Christ, you go, man, it's just not there. What would you say to do in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question. It's one that I've seen as well, and it's especially, in a broken world, when people have encountered hurt of various kinds, including church hurt, right? There's a lot of wounded people in the world, and a lot of wounded Christians that are still claiming to be Christian of various stripes. So I just want to acknowledge that you can have all sorts of flavors of people in these categories. And maybe that's actually one of the places that you first need to start as you and I encounter these types of people, is actually, again, taking the time to listen and to hear their story and to learn about what happened. I mean, I had a guy working on installing some stuff in my house the other day, and he and I got into a conversation about faith, and he was telling me about how he left the church because his wife had an affair with the worship pastor, and you can only imagine there is like some serious hurt going on there. And it was very clear that he hadn't given up on Jesus, but he wasn't sure what to do about the church, and he wasn't sure, what to do about his faith in general through that situation. And again, I think those are those moments where we need to be able to listen to people, walk with them in that, and again, point them to truth. And this shouldn't surprise you. My go-to is prayer. That I'm inviting the Holy Spirit to come into this broken situation and saying, God, help use me, help use other people in this person's life. And my prayer is that although this person has encountered broken Christians or broken people, whether they're Christian or not, in the past, maybe they claim to be Christian, that they would find a true follower of Jesus in me, and that I could love them well and point them to you truthfully and honestly, and pray that the Holy Spirit would convict and guide them as they continue in their journey with Jesus.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I appreciate you just bringing up prayer, because we really do have to acknowledge fully, as much as we're talking about apologetics and words matter and arguments and all, back to and even to the extent listening matters. All those things are so important, but ultimately we just need the power of the Holy Spirit to work in someone's life. I think the listening side of things is so good, because you really can understand, okay, where are they coming from? I think of an example in my life. I had someone I knew who was raised in the church, and I think they would say, this person would say, I sensed would probably agree with if I gave them a list of very robust truth statements from the Bible, they would say, oh yeah, yes and yes. And so my approach, tell me what you think about this. First, I really wanted to make sure that they understood what it meant to commit their lives to Jesus. So I went to then, and then this is funny, going back to the community side of the conversation earlier. I drew the famous bridge illustration. This is a little bit ago, and we just talked about what the gospel is and the gap between us and God because of sin and what Jesus did on the cross. And I asked the person, where would you see yourself? And they said, oh yeah, cross the bridge. I've definitely crossed the bridge. I'm with God, all that. So I had to I wanted to first make sure that definitely the gospel is clear, and that person definitely thought they were a Christian. because I wasn't 100 on that. I mean, did they just grow up in the church and believe it's kind of nice stuff, but they're not? So then I realized in some ways I had a tougher problem, because this person was indeed saying, oh yeah, of course, I've made that decision. So then my next approach was to say, man, I really appreciate that, you hold these things to be true, and that you have a desire. I really wanted to affirm them. You have a desire to be in the right place with God. Here's the challenge that I experienced, and this is now somebody I've walked with, so I can say this, in the context of relationship. I said, here's the challenge I'm feeling. When I look at some of the things the New Testament says about what it means to follow Jesus, I guess I'm just not seeing that those things are really a priority to you. Can I give you some examples? Sure. Well, when I read here, and different examples of what just a Christian's life looks like, and I went through a couple, 3 or so, and I said, and then I tried to ask a question. I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like those things are present in your life? So I don't want to just, it's weird. It's a tough dynamic. I'm trying to push a little bit and saying, I don't, but what do you think? And they invited them. And I'll never forget. I mean, the person said to me, and it was very somber actually in the moment, yeah, I suppose I don't really see those things in my life. And the way we left it was, I said, I really feel like it would do you well to have some time to ponder that, because I understand that you believe all the right things. I could have said, Jesus said even the demons have good theology. I didn't say that, I just said, I understand you believe a lot of the right things that a Christian believes, but I guess I'm wondering if you really trust them insofar as these other things are not really part of your life. And it was kind of a somber ending to the conversation. It was like, yeah, I think I should think about that. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because some months after that, I saw this person start reading their Bible, attending church, started to consider going on a mission trip. I'm like, what in the world has happened? But that's how I kind of got after it. It was the context of listening. Some ways it was familiarity with their life. It was definitely not just some prayer, years of prayer. But then it was pressing in. What do you think? Did I do well, or would you say, Brian, let me take you back to apologetic school here?
Yeah, right. That's exactly what I was thinking. You eloquently put that into a great illustration of how that actually plays out. Being honest with people, right? I think one of the things that often happens with people is their love for them. They want to compromise the truth, and they don't want to have those hard conversations and be like. And you did that. I think you did that in a very respectful, loving way, right? You're trying to care for that person. It's not about winning an argument, which sometimes people can get into,
right? In
a very combative moment, where this is a moment of counsel and comfort, where you're. But to do that, you have to challenge them, and doing that lovingly. So. One thing that we have to remember is, one of the most important ways that we love people is by being honest with them and pointing them to truth, praying for them, but also realizing, and this I just want to say for all the pastors and maybe parents out there, people that have been in these situations, realizing that there's only so much that you can do. There is no silver bullet apologetic moment or way of approaching a conversation. People are people. They're free to love and to not love. We live in a broken world, unfortunately. And as much as I love my children, that's one of the scary parts about being a parent is you're like, they could choose not to love me. They could choose to go do any number of things. But what I can have control of is my love for them and how I'm going to treat them, how I'm going to pray for them and be consistent with them. And this, of course, is modeled to us in the way that God loves us and the way that his relationship is with us and how the way he calls us to model that, to be, to love people as he loves.
Yeah. That's such a good word. There's that old phrase of I don't know if the people say God or the Holy Spirit, but whatever is a gentleman. He doesn't force himself on a person or whatever. And I think similarly, when we're trying to challenge, there's a part of it that one, I only want to do what I just described doing under the prompting of the Holy Spirit that says this is time. I don't want to have a mentality of I've just got to constantly hound them. And what that really does is probably when somebody has that kind of driving, which ultimately ends up driving away, but that driving presence of we've got to hit it, and where are you at, and why aren't you making this move? And it really, I mean, it can be out of compassion, but it can also be this. There's a certain level of we just have to release trust to the Lord that, you know, He does seek them more persistently and meet them more directly than even we could, and we just have to. There's a certain element of faith in that. I'm curious. I'm sure. Well, I don't know if you ever get fatigued about talking about all the things that have happened because of the visibility that Wes Huff has brought to the organization and just to faith. Having now been, I think it's been over a year since we talked. I can't remember how many months it was, but is there anything through all this, because that was the front end, and now there's been a lot more in the way of conversations, podcasts, all this. Is there anything all of this has taught you guys? Any insights into culture? Any insights into presenting the gospel? Anything at all that you go, boy, we're smarter now about engaging the world than we used to be? Or does it feel like, no, actually, we kind of just continue to do the same things we've been doing?
Well, I'd say two things. One is I just want to encourage people. We have seen more people come to faith than ever before, and we hear from people constantly that have come to faith, are coming to faith. I just want to encourage people. Man, the Lord is on the move and doing great work in people's lives. You don't always see it. And we actually had somebody reach out to us just recently and said, I'm the last person that my friends and family would think would come to faith. I mean, we actually just got an email the other day from a CEO of this organization. I won't say who it is, but he's like, I've been praying for my sister-in-law for years. She just came to faith, and he was reaching out to us because it was just happened to be through our ministry. But man, we're seeing that happen all the time, and so I would just want to encourage people. Man, the Lord is on the move, and as dark as the world may be at times, and it is dark, there is light. And that light is all the more bright in the midst of this darkness, and that does encourage me. And the other thing that I would just say is, for what it's worth, pathos precedes logos. And what I mean by that is your character matters. This is one of the reasons why we talk so much at AC about loving God, loving people. In the world that we live in a world that's so dark and broken, people are looking for light. And Jesus said it this way. He said, people will know that you're one of my disciples if you what? If you love each other.
Yeah, right on.
Right? And so that would be my encouragement to people is, man, make sure that we get that right. Make sure that we love God, like really love God, and make sure that we really actually have a genuine love for each other. Mm-hmm. That is a light that burns so bright in this dark world.
Yeah, that's a good word. I mean, the apologetic of a well-lived life is a big deal. We're to the point, it's funny, you're taking your first or your oldest to college. We just took a couple of weeks ago our youngest to college. And it's interesting because now we have our older two kids are both married. They're following Jesus. They're active at our church by choice. We've always said the whole time through for our kids, we've said, go where you want to go, in college, wherever, and all that. And they've just continued. They serve in our church. And you know what's interesting, and this is back to this point of the apologetic of your life, of loving Jesus and loving people, is we're at a stage in our life now where people are coming to us increasingly saying, it really is such a testimony to what you guys preach and say you believe to see how your kids are living their lives and what your family culture is. And so I think that's just such an encouraging word. And I'll say this by way, in just a minute, I'm going to ask if you got anything else to share, but just as an encouragement to you on God is on the move. This year, we played, as we do, a couple of our church news videos that say, hey, a baptism's coming up. This year, by the time of our regular baptism time in August, we ended up baptizing 150 people in Lake Michigan. It was so powerful to watch this. And
That's awesome.
I read all the testimonies. And particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, we are seeing people come from more diverse and sometimes even difficult backgrounds than we ever have before. And I'm reading these testimonies, and the common theme is just Jesus changed my life over and over again. This last time we had people coming out of Mormonism. We had a person coming out of Islamic background. We had a person coming out of a cult background, and a person coming out of a Jewish background, all coming to know Jesus. And then we had people coming out of all kinds of other, some with church background, and hey, I'm just finally a place I want to put my trust in Jesus. And then other people, many had spent time in jail, addiction, all kinds of things. So God's on the move. He's doing it, and He will continue. Anything else? It's been such a good conversation, Andy. Such a big fan of your work. But anything else you want to share before we finish up today?
Well, you know what, man, thank you for all that you're doing, and that's so exciting to hear what your church is doing, and I just pray God's richest blessings over you guys as you're continuing to share the gospel. And man, I am excited to hear about what the Lord's doing through you guys, and I just pray more and more people would come to know and love Jesus through your church and be connected into community. If we can be a resource to anybody listening, that's our desire. We're an organization focused on the gospel. We have various resources that you can use in, say, your community group or in your own personal life through Bible reading plans and stuff like that. That is our privilege to be able to serve the church in that way. So if we can help, you can check us out at apologeticscanada.com, and we're on YouTube and various other places. It's easy to find us.
And I just can't say enough about your resources. They are so good, so quality. And way earlier in the conversation, you talked about this idea of we need to know what we believe and we need to know why we believe it. And part of doing that work is what gives us confidence as we're entering in conversations with people that believe different things. We don't need to feel insecure. We don't feel like we need to getting attacked or something like that. We know what we believe and why. And I just could not commend the resources coming out of Apologetics Canada highly enough to those who say, I just need to do some work and know better what I believe and why I believe. So thanks for your continued work, Andy. Thanks. I know with all of the load you guys are under, I've prayed for you and will continue to, that God just gives you incredible favor. And I love, he's continuing to do that. I love you guys set such a tone of humility and dependence as an organization that just kind of emanates out of how you approach your leadership. And I appreciate that. And I know God's going to continue to pour His favor and pour His Spirit out on you. So blessings on you, brother. Thanks for the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Andy Steiger from Apologetics Canada. And I just cannot, again, commend enough the resources that his team is producing. The big point of apologetics, the big point of dealing with these hard questions of faith is really to help remove some of those obstacles and hangups that might stand in the way of someone giving their life to Jesus. And so that's why I really like bringing folks like Andy on the show and pointing you to their resources, because I want you to be equipped to help others to advance. And so please take advantage of those. Learn what you believe. Learn why you believe it. Get prepared for some of those questions that come up along the way in conversations with people who are far from Christ. And ultimately, pray. Don't wait until you have or think you have all the answers. You never will. To share your faith, just step out there in faith and know the Holy Spirit will meet you along the way. If you don't have an answer, you can always tell somebody, hey, let me get back to you on that. And there's great resources out there, and Apologetics Canada has many of them. Well, if this was a helpful conversation for you, please rate and review us. This has been a production of Engedi Church, and so we've got more incredible conversations coming down the pipeline. But until next time, just know God made you to advance.